I'm Troy Glover. I'm a professor at the University of Waterloo and also the director of the Healthy Communities Research Network at the university, in addition to being a professor in the Department of Recreation and Leisure Studies. So I'm quite delighted with the several mentions of recreation throughout the conference. I think it plays a big role in terms of addressing social isolation and loneliness and fostering social connectedness. Today, my presentation's titled Hacking Your Neighborhood, the Power of Placemaking for Social Connection. And I do want to acknowledge my co-author, so to speak, Krista Costas Radstreet. I worked with her on this project when she was with the Canadian Parks and Recreation Association, but she is currently the executive director of the, and I want to make sure I did this correct. To find it, I asked her to text it to me. She is the executive director of the Active Living Alliance for Canadians with a Disability. So I just wanted to acknowledge Chris Lai. All right. In every community, I suspect, where you live, where you've visited, places that you've seen, every community has mundane, unsightly, terrible spaces within it. So pictured on the screen, you can see kind of a normal parking lot that we might see in any community in which anybody lives. My question to you today, rhetorically, is what if the spaces you pass by every day could be reimagined as places of connection? How would you reimagine this space? Look at it. Snowball court. Pickleball court, sure. Other ideas? Anybody?
A bazaar.
A bazaar.
Roller seating.
Roller skating. And what's a house? A community garden. Okay, I think these are great creative ideas, and this is the theme of my topic today. I'm going to talk about how you might be able to reimagine these spaces as places of connection. The big question, though, is like, can an unsightly parking lot or any space like this be turned into a place of social connection? And of course, my answer is yes, it definitely can. The key is that when we talk about social connection, I think the thing that we need to appreciate is that social connection has to happen somewhere. Okay, now typically if we're talking about face-to-face connection, sure, we're talking about spaces where people can connect in person. But this could extend to cyberspace or virtual communities as well. You need a platform to connect with folks on those. Today I'm going to focus on the face-to-face, though. I'm going to focus on the in-person sort of spaces that we can connect. And I want to underscore how important space is when it comes to social connection. This has been recognized by the U.S. Surgeon General's report in 2023. I know it's been cited several times, and I'm quite certain everybody in this room is aware that in 2023, the U.S. Surgeon General identified social isolation and loneliness as twin crises and an epidemic in the United States. And in doing so, in his report, the Surgeon General talked about 6 different pillars to advance social connection. And the first one that he identified was to strengthen social infrastructure in local communities. And that includes designing the built environment to promote social connection. So I think this is something that we need to give serious thought to. How do we turn our environment into spaces where people can connect socially in a positive way? The clear idea here behind this presentation and what the Surgeon General was suggesting is that we need spaces in which to connect. This was especially true during the pandemic. This just became very evident. If you think about the things that you did during the pandemic, I suspect that all of us were faced with the challenges of being restricted in terms of our mobility, and it forced us to get very creative in terms of thinking about how do we get that connection, where would we go for it when we can't really travel to a different country or perhaps even to another city, but we're faced with doing things where we lived. So I'm curious from the audience, what were things that you did during the pandemic to actually experience connection, aside from the being online? Yes?
The car park in our area made a skate loop, so we would take the kids in the ground down the.
Okay, excellent. So a skating loop in our local park.
Was the fire pits.
Hosting fire pits. So gathering around the fire pit with other neighbors and whatnot. Other ideas? Yeah.
The golf course was closed behind our house. We were able to actually use it as a national park, which was lovely. So it was really social, walking around the golf course.
Excellent. So golf courses repurposed as parks. In fact, I remember there be a very lively discussion about why do we even have these golf courses? Why aren't we turning that into parks? So it's kind of interesting. I think I saw a hand over. Yes.
Driveway boba.
Driveway boycott. Okay, excellent. Yes, yes.
We had hallway sushi parties, the parts of Bill.
Awesome. Hallway party. So what I love about this is I think I heard driveway, I heard hallway. These are not spaces that we would typically think of as spaces of connection, right? Again, as something who's interested in recreation and leisure, right? It's interesting how you could all of a sudden convert these spaces into these spaces that are conducive to getting together with other folks. So as I say, this was just evident during the pandemic that we need this type of space, and we thought really creatively about how to use mundane spaces. The amazing thing about the pandemic for me was that it forced us to live differently. We became very creative. So, other examples when you think about, those are individual examples everybody gave, but when you think about the cities in which we lived or the communities, there were things like outdoor dining and streetery programs, right? Like all of a sudden it was like, why are we having these parking spots in front of a restaurant when we could actually extend the patio and engage with other people? A lot of cities and communities hosted open streets and pop-up pedestrian zones. I know that a lot of neighborhoods, for example, during the pandemic would actually close down their streets, often in an unsanctioned way. They would just close it off. We want our kids to play outside. We're just gonna shut it down, or we're gonna open it up to the kids, go ahead, use the chalk, ride your bikes, whatever. Fantastic. Pop-up parks and public seating installations, kind of like the extended patios. We saw a lot of taking up parking spots by converting them into little seating areas where people could enjoy themselves. And then, it's really interesting if you're from Ontario, this is kind of a frustration point for me, is that I thought one of the amazing things that we did during the pandemic was extend bike lanes. And you know what, I'm just going to go on a little bit of a rant here. It just frustrates the heck out of me when people distinguish, and planners do this, they distinguish between commuting as a cyclist and recreational cycle. Do we do that with cars? Do we go, you're driving where today because to have fun? Well, we're not going to count your drive, okay? We're going to count all the people who are driving to work. And yet, they say about 70% of people actually bike. Only 2% of them are commuters. And so when you talk about the value of biking, actually a lot gets driven by socializing, going somewhere to socialize with others. Anyway, I love this about the pandemic. As difficult as it was, we learned a lot about what we can do creatively with space. And so, not only did it get us to think differently about our communities, but specifically, I think the pandemic, because it restricted our mobility, it got us thinking differently about our neighborhoods. Whereas before, I think we tend to live in a culture where it's kind of we were focused on anonymity with our neighbors. We were kind of forced to crave that social connection. And so they were much more open to getting to know their neighbors, and they started to see their neighborhoods as places where they could actually engage with others. So I'm going to take this in a bit of a different direction, but stay with me, okay? During the pandemic, or just before, the Public Health Agency of Canada approached a bunch of actually all theaters and physical activity in Canada and said, you know what, you have so many guidelines when it comes to physical activity that we need to create a common vision. Okay, and so they created this new initiative where they facilitated one, where they brought together all the advocates for physical activity and said, look, we're going to work together, we're going to come up with one vision as opposed to having 7 different guidelines and frameworks when it came to physical activity in Canada. Well, then the pandemic happened. The Canadian Parks and Recreation, so what the Public Health Agency Canada did was they said, we want to break this down, this common vision, into various areas. One of them was spaces and places. And so they asked organizations in Canada to kind of take a theme and then run with it to create, to add to this common vision. So the Canadian Parks and Recreation Association took on the spaces and places. Then the pandemic happened. And so Chris DeCosta Bradstreet was in charge of this initiative for the Canadian Parks and Recreation Association. She reached out to me and said, I know that you do a lot of stuff in space and place. Could you help us with this? And I said, yes, but only if you extend it beyond physical activity to focus on social connectedness too. Okay? And in addition, if we can learn from the pandemic, let's start to think about how can you actually repurpose or reimagine neighborhood as a space in which we can engage in these sorts of activities. So that led to us creating a website called ActivateYourNeighbourhood.ca. Please check it out. But in it is going to cover a lot of the different stuff that I'm going to talk about today. Okay? Essentially, it's a tactical guide to help Canadians reimagine, rethink, and repurpose the spaces in their neighborhoods to support and encourage physical activity and, in my view, more importantly, social connectedness. Okay, so I want to talk about this today. This framework, or this guide, is premised upon the idea of what's called tactical placemaking. Now, some of you, if you're urbanists, you may be familiar with the term tactical urbanism. If not, it's totally cool stuff, okay? It comes down to bottom-up approaches to addressing issues with your city. So a lot of people will engage as tactical urbanists, like if they're upset about, the city's been unresponsive when it comes to building a bike lane, then people themselves will just start painting lines on the road. Like, I don't care about what the city does, I'm gonna ask for forgiveness, but I'm gonna do it and then create that bike lane because this is what we want. So tactical placemaking starts with the premise of this idea of tactical urbanism, which is premised upon low-cost, deliberate grassroots initiatives to temporarily alter the built environment to improve local neighborhoods and public gathering spaces. Okay, so that's the first premise. Now, people call the term placemaking. Let me just educate you a little bit about it. You may know about it, but I'm going to give you my take on what it means. Here, actually, the place should be highlighted. My apologies for that. But here, we move from tactical to the idea of place. Now, just to get really academic on you here, there's a distinction among academics between space and place. Space, generally speaking, is really just a bunch of coordinates. Okay, it's subjective. Every day you walk past spaces. It doesn't mean anything to you. It's just there. Okay, a space becomes a place when we imbue it with meaning, and often that's connected to actually having some sort of experience in the place or interacting with people meaningfully in that place. So for instance, I don't know, maybe you are from Vancouver and you walk by this space every day and it was just a space. But now, after this conference, every time you look up at this space, it's actually about to have some meaning to you because you actually engaged with it during this conference. And you have fond memories of it and this outstanding talk that you heard on Placemaking, and they're going to think about those sorts of things. So, tactical placemaking is about converting spaces into places. And that distinction is important because it's all about how a space becomes meaningful to people. And then finally, and here again, I bet to pop up the making part. The making part involves a DIY or hacker orientation to create something new or tinker with something existing. So kind of like maker culture. What we're trying to do here is we're trying to empower people to take this on themselves, kind of like the tactical urbanism approach, where it's bottom up, it is trying to inspire people to do things for themselves. I will acknowledge, though, that when it comes to any of these strategies that I'm about to talk about, cities can engage in them. So it can be top down, it can be bottom up. This is something that my colleague Aaron Sharp and I talked about. We can play in the city. In other words, the city can create events and activities for us, and we can play in the city. Or we can play with the city. In other words, we can take on the role of actually engaging with the city itself. All right. Key here is that anyone can be a neighborhood placemaker, and anyone can hack their neighborhood. So here, and I'm based on the website that I directed you to, we've identified 7 strategies that can be used to make a space, a mundane space, more engaging when it comes to social connection and, I guess, physical activity. All right, first of all, let's talk about with the obvious one when it comes to social connectedness. Now, you have to appreciate that I've verbified some words. So over here, we're talking about convivializing the space. And the reason I verbified it is so that when people suit these terms, they think, I can do these things, right? I can take them on, and I can engage in a sort of action. So we can convivialize spaces, and that's where we can provide features that give neighbors by cue to gather, sit, and socialize in neighborhood spaces. How many people have heard of chair bombing? Right? Yeah, awesome. This is such an easy practice people can engage in. If you have an empty space, there's no cue to hang out, right? There's no nudge for you to move over and actually engage or kind of spend time in that space. Add a couple of chairs, and it gives you the cue, and it's okay to actually sit down and hang out. Chair bombing is the activity of a group of people deciding, you know what, 4 o'clock on Wednesday, we're all going to meet up in that Monday space. We're all going to each rent a chair and hang out there. So that's one type of way to convivialize space. I've heard over here about the idea of fire pits. Why don't we, I'm saying this, but there may be bylaws against this. Why do we always have them in our backyards? Why don't we have them in our front yards? What are we doing to engage our neighbors? And so this is a theme throughout of the things I'm going to talk about, is where we place these things matters. The more we think about others, the more maybe things will actually appear in our front yard, their public areas. And it could be something like a listening booth or other things like that where you can use these sorts of strategies to convivialize the space. You can also naturalize the space. Somebody mentioned community gardening. Okay, obvious way to incorporate or enhance the neighborhood space with plants, flowers, and grasses to beautify the landscape, making it more appealing as places to spend time. And so I think everybody's familiar with community gardening. We could play garden sharing. It was sort of similar to community gardening, like sharing your yard with other folks. Portable planters, we've seen those a lot during the pandemic to beautify a mundane space. I don't know if people are familiar with guerrilla gardening. Happens a lot in Vancouver, actually. This is where people take it upon themselves to identify terrible looking places within their urban environment, and they just decide to plant flowers and stuff. It's not even their property, you just decide to do that. And then how many people have heard of parking day? Okay, parking is perhaps one of the coolest activities you can actually engage in. I believe it's every last Friday in September, every year. It's a global movement where people will pay for parking spaces. Okay, so they'll feed the meter, but instead of actually parking the car there, because they paid for the spots, they'll roll out artificial grass and benches and planters and stuff, and have a little social gather with friends. Parking day. Okay, brilliant. But these are ways that we can naturalize our space and make it less mundane. We can obviously activate our space. So here, some people talk about activating as a term that would apply to all of these types of approaches. Here, we're using it very specifically about using visual displays of physical activities such as sport demonstrations or the availability of sport equipment, so things like portable basketball nets to encourage spectators and participants. So, after having a pumpkin walk after Halloween, sport playing is actually becoming very popular. So you've probably seen the little libraries, but this is the same sort of approach, but the sport equipment where neighborhood kids, or I guess adults too, to play with this sort of thing. I mentioned this before, but being upfront with play, the idea of most people, they will create a rink in their backyards. Why not do it in your front yard and invite people from throughout the neighborhood to engage in that activity, right? So thinking about where it goes. Projecting boundaries. Again, we need nudges to engage in activity. We need to know that it's okay to participate in things. This is actually from Europe, where they project like a laser image of a soccer pitch. It indicates that you can actually play soccer, right? You can use chalk. You could paint lines. I'm trying to think of how I can do all these things in front of my house. So like painting the sidewalk, painting the street. If the municipality gets upset, I mean, fine. But like, why not? It gives people the cue that it's okay to participate. Engaging in street fitness classes or athletic activities, another example. Colonize. That's kind of a strange word, but I did verbifying here. Here is the idea of incorporating food, particularly its preparation, distribution, and consumption into neighborhood spaces. How many people have been at work and then all of a sudden they invite a bunch of food trucks into like a parking lot, and all of a sudden it completely changes the dynamic of that space, right? Food, and I think the next presentation is all about food, right? Is a really great way to engage people in social connection. I heard examples up during the pandemic about things like driveway lunches or hallway lunches, street barbecues. This is cool. In Europe, I think this is actually in France, that they have a republic of super neighbors where people just line up their streets with the break tables and chairs. It's almost like chair bonding, but with food. And then they create a super long table that is inclusive of everybody in the neighborhood and invite them to like a potluck or a community meal. Very cool. All right, can also spectacleize or festivalize or eventify, which means using featured entertainment to attract people to neighborhood spaces. In Waterloo, where I'm from, they have the Grand Porch Party, it's called. And so actually local bands, like legit bands, will perform for people's front porches. And people in the community just show up and watch these concerts like right on the front porch. It's really cool. So things like street parties, pop-up cinema, and again, we talked about closing roads for play. These are all ways that we can actually attract people to engage in different activities. This is a photo from Vancouver, actually. Here we can also aestheticize. And here we're talking about incorporating art and its variety of forms to beautify a neighborhood space and encourage greater activity. I don't know if people are familiar with Ali Wu. I think it's so cool. I mean, this is, for all intents and purposes, an ugly alleyway, okay, prior to them painting it mostly pink, and then putting up a basketball hoop. And all of a sudden, tourists are actually attracted to this space, all because of paint and a backboard and hoop. Okay, it's the power of like transforming a space through tactile placemaking. Chop block. I don't know if people are familiar with yard building. I don't get this, but like some people will knit a whole bunch of coverings and then cover like trees, or they might cover fire hydrants. And the idea behind it that may sound silly. Like, what does that have to do with social connection? But sometimes we just need people to pause and have a conversation about how ridiculous something is in your community. You know, if you're walking along this neighborhood and you spot this, you're likely to stop, look at it, and then have somebody else around and go, what the heck is that? Which is the start of the conversation with folks, all right? So again, I'm trying to think of, can I put that in my yard? Was that something that I could do myself? You can also whimsicalize or gamify spaces. So this is where you add imaginative and sometimes quirky features or illustrations to signify gameplay, to encourage activity in a neighborhood space. In Montreal, they actually have swingies at bus stops. Is that cool? Like, I mean, I actually wouldn't mind waiting for a bus if I could actually swing it at. You know, you've probably seen paint on pavement to like indicate some sort of a game or activity. You know, that's the same example over on the other side with our race. All of a sudden, I've seen piano keys. You're walking up to a subway or something. You know, all of these things may be silly, but they start conversations. They get people talking. They get people acting in silly ways and actually interacting with one another. And that can be the beginning of, you know, connecting with others. So all of these activities, the reason we're trying to promote them is to get people to think about their spaces and to think about how we can transform them in ways that people will actually connect with others. And for us, if we want to encounter others and welcome the opportunity to get acquainted, we must first notice each other. Last night I was at a table and I was talking with a group from this conference. And I was saying, in sociology, we talk about how everyday urban experiences are characterized by something called civil inattention. We are surrounded by people who we just casually acknowledge, but the idea is that we're co-present with that. What co-present means is that we are physically proximate, we're in the same space, but we're socially distant. That's just how urban life unfolds, is through civil inattention, okay? And what we want to do through these sorts of activities is move toward civil attention, where we get people to not only appreciate that they're in the same space, but then actually they acknowledge others and engage with other people. And the interesting thing about this is, you know, when we talk about social connection, I think we often forget how important different types of ties are. We've talked at this conference a lot about intimate ties, so like relationships with close friends, with intimate partners. We've talked about weak ties, so acquaintances and then co-workers, but we often forget what are called invisible ties. These are the ties where when we engage with the space, there are people who are part of that, who we recognize as part of the space, but we may never, ever have a conversation with that. These are called nodding relationships. And when I have conducted research on walking in your neighborhood and social connections, everybody seems to know it often is a guy, you know, no shirt guy. I always encounter no shirt guy or like yellow jacket guy. It's that guy who like you see every day when you're walking, you know, in your neighborhood or at work. And we may sort of not think that they're important, which is why they call it invisible ties. But that smile, that nod, that simple engagement can help us feel connected to our neighborhood, to our community. And that's really important. So things like this may seem really ridiculous, a lot of these strategies, but ultimately you're trying to build and strengthen the different ties that we engage with every day, whether it's intimate ties, weak ties, acquaintances, or these invisible ties. And so I'll just end off by saying encouraging social connection sometimes means nudging people. And the more we can engage with our space and nudge people to engage in that social interaction, the more we are, what's the term that Pete uses at Reassure? Human connectors or human catalysts, connector catalysts, something to that effect. Human connection catalysts. All right. So, there are lots of different things that we could think of for a space like this, and hopefully today I've given you a number of ideas that you could apply. Thank you very much.